for her also with tech tonight. Appreciate Jana. As many of you know, Jana, does faith counseling work through Synergy. And so if you're leaving with the jitters and you're not sure what to do afterwards, you can make an appointment with Jana. So, and we're going to begin this evening with a musical number by Jenny Richardson. She was going to be accompanied by Kelly Stewart, which is the daughter of James, sister of Bryant, but she had a rehearsal that she had to do. So Jenny's going to do this lovely arrangement that she made of High to Kolob. And I said, well, can we get high on Kolob? I don't know. So we'll find out. I bet we can with her arrangement. So after that, we'll have Catherine Matsanta give opening prayer. And then we'll go there. Thanks. You can. Yeah, I would love you to say anything you want. Okay. Anything you want. This is, just so you know, this I may have arranged this meeting, but I want women to run it as much as possible.
Okay. Well, I'm just a regular fangirl of Cynthia and Susan, so this is great. I wanted to play this piece as soon as I knew I would be playing tonight, because Susan, this reminds me of your beautiful essay in Search for a Larger God. And I don't think we have very many hymns in the hymn book that are mysterious. They're mostly quite, they can be reverent or somber, but not a lot of them leave room for wonder and uncertainty. And I really love this hymn because to me, it's harmonically just in a circle, around and around, the same harmonies over and over. And it speaks to the wonder and uncertainty of life and beyond. And I love that. I love that there's room for possibility. And I like that Parley Pratt, who wrote the words to this, it suggests to me kind of the radiant Mormonism that Bushman speaks of, like the what if there's more? And so I hope you enjoy this. To me, it's sort of a musing, someone just musing, thinking, pondering. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Jenny. That was gorgeous.
I'm just going to turn this camera around.
Our Father in heaven, we thank you this evening that we can be gathered together in this beautiful spring evening. We're so grateful for Cynthia and Susan for the incredible work that they're doing to help uncover the voices of women and to help us to understand each other more fully and more compassionately. We're so grateful to feel more united because of the work they're doing. We ask you to be with them, to have thy spirit here, and that they may have their hearts open and the words that they need. And we ask you to please bless our hearts to be open to the messages that we need individually. And we see this with gratitude in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Catherine. Catherine has her book out now, Mother Tree, available anywhere, everywhere, everywhere. Highly recommended. All right. So I listened. I don't know. I know a lot of you have listened to these too. And I was listening to a podcast in March that I just loved. So just to use the mic. But what do I believe, right? That's the one we talked about earlier with Lyric. Is that the
Articles of faith.
with the articles of faith and things, yeah. Anyway, it was just, I was really impressed with the questions and the responses from their guests and the content and what they were pointing us to. So I highly recommend that, and of course all the others. But you know, my journey has been from lots of mistaken patriarchy and doing things wrong and still trying to get things right. So I'm really looking forward to my continuing education and being schooled by these wonderful, intelligent, fun women. And grateful again that they were willing to come. And so, you know, they'll have some presentation. If you do have a question or clarification or something, feel free to raise your hand. If it's a good time, they'll be able to answer it. Those on Zoom, put it in the chat and Jana will get to you as they can. We do appreciate you just as much, but we kind of have to give deference to the live audience this time. So anyway, we are so excited to be here with all of you tonight. Here's some more coming in. Some more fans I can see. There's some seats up here by the couch. Oh, right up here. And so, you know, the bios are online, so usually don't take time to talk about the presenters while they're here. Sometimes we do ask them just a few simple questions without preparation. So like a favorite movie?
Anything by Wes Anderson. Any Wes Anderson movie.
Give an example.
The Royal Tenenbaums is on my very, very short list. I'm just gonna say that, very short list.
Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. I love the dialogue, the snappiness of it.
Nice. Favorite book?
Oh gosh, Catherine's book that I'm reading right now. Whatever I'm reading right now is my favorite.
Mother Tree. There you go. Good.
I'm going to go with that same answer. Universal Christ. That's what I'm reading right
Richard
now.
Rohr.
It's my third time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a beautiful book.
Yeah.
Excellent. Let's see, a favorite place. Doesn't have to be the favorite, a favorite place.
The patio at Gabriel's Restaurant, which is north of Santa Fe.
Mauna Kea Beach on the Big Island of Hawaii.
Ooh. I thought they were going to say Hires Big Age because that's where they
Well,
have dinner
yeah,
tonight.
we were just there.
She's right.
Our favorite place to go together.
Yes.
As recently as 15 minutes.
Right.
All right, I'm going to turn the time over to you guys. You can either hold the mic or whatever.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm a little bit overwhelmed by all of this.
I know.
I didn't want to start crying with that gorgeous music. I
I
know.
know.
How did this happen? What?
I don't know. We keep saying we're imposters.
Total.
What are we doing?
Total. I don't know. Do you
Yeah.
want to pass this back and forth? What do you want to do?
Yeah, let's just do
Okay.
that. So I'm going to start us out, and we have a question that I think Jay came up with, or maybe we helped him come up with it. Oh, you did. Oh, Susan came up with the question. What might change if Latter-day Saint women began to speak openly and honestly about their feelings and experiences. And we wanted to do a little bit of advertising, like with Jay. So we made a little slide for this and put it on our social media. And it was funny because we really meant it to just go up and say, here are the details and the time, and click here, you know, for the Zoom link or the address if you want to come in person. And what ended up happening was women started answering the question, and we were like, oh, okay, good. We have some material here already because we have the best listeners ever. And they were like, well, I'll tell you what happened. So it was pretty awesome. So we're gonna read a couple of their answers because I think it's a good way to kind of start us out. So one woman said, we don't know what can change. Things have changed over and over in the course of church history. If leaders truly come to listen to and empathize and understand women, more and more of them may become willing to look for and ask God for a solution to this imbalance of power in the church. I just can't believe that this is a final perfect way for Christ to manage power in his church. I believe as we all become more open to it, a better way will be revealed. I was like, whoo. And what I loved about that is, I think that this kind of falls faithfully, if I can use that word, in line with the idea of an ongoing restoration. But as we like to say, do we believe our own stuff? Like, do we believe that there is an ongoing restoration? Because the woman who wrote this comment has hope that things can change, because things have changed before. And yet I think there are plenty who would be like, no, I think this is perfectly where Christ would want women in the church. So that's why I loved that comment. Susan loved a different one.
The comment that I loved said, I could be more of my authentic self instead of feeling pigeonholed into certain images and expectations. And the thing that I loved about that comment is that Cynthia and I talk all the time about being in the cheap seats. We are not in a position to affect any kind of change in this church at all. Some days it doesn't even feel like we're in a position to hope for very much change, but we are in charge of our own spiritual lives. All of us are in charge of our own spiritual lives. And so I think that if women could begin to speak more openly, it would change the women. It would change us. And it would change the church one Relief Society room at a time, one conversation at a time, as those words started to spill out. And that's a different kind of change, but that's like transformational change. And that's what church is meant to be about. It's the kind of change that we're meant to be about as a people, as I see it. And so that's even more important change to me than any institutional change that might happen. We would love to hear some of your thoughts about that question. So be thinking about that. Be thinking about what might change for you, what might change for us as a body of Christ if women felt at liberty to speak the things of their hearts. Just for grins, I was thinking about it, I was sitting up here. Are there any women in this room who do not feel like they have been able to say all the things that they might want to say at church? It has certainly been my experience that there are a lot of conversations that go on in the corridors, in the parking lots, in the nursing mother's room, in the kitchen. There are conversations that go on that deserve a wider audience than they receive. We whisper about a lot of things, and there are many things that we don't even whisper about. So when we started this podcast, it was really just because we couldn't hold our own stories any longer. Something had to give, and it was time to start talking. And so we decided to do it. LDS women have felt unseen and unheard for so long. And I know that that's painting with a broad brush. You might be a woman who's sitting in this room thinking, I've never felt unseen and unheard. I never feel better than when I'm at church. I never feel more able to be myself. I know there are women who do have that experience, but it was not my experience. And so I came up with a podcast project that I thought might help. And what I've heard since is me too, me too, me too, me too. So it may not be everyone's experience, but it's many, many women's experience. And Cynthia and I realized pretty soon after we started this that we had stepped into a space that already existed. there was a space waiting for these conversations to happen, and we just kind of stumbled into it. It's like we stumbled into this whole thing that was already up and running, and all we had to, somebody just needed to start talking, and it took off. And so that's been amazing. One of the things we say to each other most often is it's a very low bar. It's a very low bar. We feel like we do nothing most of the time. We feel like we do nothing. And our listeners respond in ways that show us that we're giving them so much more than we feel like we're putting out. And that's because of what already existed there. You know, the gift already existed, and we just needed to be able to tap into it. I was listening to an On Being podcast the other day, and Kate DiCamillo, the children's author, was on it. It was such a great interview. I saw lots of heads nodding. I'm sure you've seen it, but it made me think about, we had a live retreat. It was our first live event in Phoenix a few weeks ago. And on the Friday night, we had a mix and mingle. And we're all in this restaurant. We took over the patio of the restaurant, and I just kind of looked around at the women in the room, and I was trying to get a sense of like, what is this? What is this gathering? It wasn't like a high school reunion exactly. Nobody knew each other. These women who had come from all over the country, they didn't know each other before, but they were all talking like old friends, like immediately. These were tables of women sharing their stories like old friends, like they've known each other forever. And I thought, this is magic. What has happened here? And then I was listening to that On Being podcast, and Kate DiCamillo told a story that expressed it perfectly. And she said she was at a book signing, and a young boy, she was signing his book, and he was leaning very hard against her. And his mother said, "Don't lean on her." And the little boy looked at his mother and said, "It's okay, she knows me." And that's what happened in that room. This is what Kate said about it. It's that great gift of connection as I try to make sense of the world through these stories that helps other people make sense out of the world too, and provides comfort and solace. It's the gift of connection. And really, when we receive people's stories and when we're willing to share our own stories, that is ministry, like in its most basic sense. When you're holding the story of another person, when you know things about them, sitting next to them in a gospel doctrine class or a Relief Society class becomes ministry. You're holding the same things. But we so often don't feel at liberty to show up whole and share those very real things that are on our hearts. And specifically with church things, it's hard to talk about the things that are hard. Church is not a safe space to do that in my experience. It's the least safe space where we feel like we can do that. So Amanda, to you.
I have found that when friends find out I have an LDS feminist podcast, well, first of all, I don't just go around telling everyone. I mean, my really close friends and family, they all do, but I kind of keep it on the down low just because I know that can be offensive to some people, and I'm not looking to like stir up anything with, you know, friends and acquaintances or whatever. So I don't always say it, but inevitably they find out, and their first instinct is to defend the church. And when I say defend, I mean, they say, you know, in this section, we're talking about feeling unseen. They say, well, I have never felt unseen. I have always felt like my voice is heard. And I liken it to, as a thermally challenged person, you've heard me say that before if you're a listener to the podcast, like, I mean, I'm wearing a sweater right now, you know what I mean? I'll go out walking and it's freezing and I have 2 coats on and 2 pairs of pants, and then I'll run into someone wearing a t-shirt. And I think that's exactly what it's like. You are feeling something differently than I am feeling, and we're both right. And so you feel like you've always been seen. I feel the opposite. I have felt seen in some ways, but I have felt unseen in very many ways as well. And can both be correct? Can both be allowed in the same room? And so that's been my challenge talking to friends and acquaintances, is it's really hard for them to kind of bridge that gap and come over to my side. And they say things like, maybe when I share experiences with them, they'll say things like, well, that bishop was out of line. Like, this isn't the church, this isn't the structure, it was that particular individual. And I'm like, well, you know, or they'll say, it's different now in leadership for women, Cynthia. And I'm like, it hasn't even been 8 years since I've been in a presidency. Like, it's not that long ago, but, well, things are different now. And I'm like, well, and then my favorite one is that only happens in Utah. And as Susan and I have found out, as we have been privileged to hear the stories from women around the world, that is not true. And it's difficult because I don't want to sit there and bash what they're saying. Their experience is valid, but my experience is valid too. And that's where it kind of gets difficult. And that's when it's actually hardest, is when women deny that other women feel this. I can almost forgive men when they're like, what are you talking about? Because I'm like, they haven't walked in my shoes. They're in the decision-making roles in the church. I am not. But when it's other women taking other women down, that's when it's so incredibly difficult, because they feel seen, I don't, and it's really difficult for them to kind of come over and be like, oh, okay, I believe you when you say you're cold outside and I'm just in a t-shirt.
I heard a conversation once with poet Claudia Rankine, and she was talking about a time that she was picked up. She had flown into a city to do a reading, and she was picked up by a driver. She's a Black woman. She was picked up by a driver who was extremely racist and extremely vocal in those views. And they only got a few miles into the drive. They had like a 40-minute drive to get to the venue. And they only got a few miles into the drive before she realized she was in a really bad situation and had to figure out how she was going to handle that. And she said something that I have not been able to forget since. And that was, she said, how can I say this so that we can stay in the car together? And I've thought about that so many times, because really our goal with this podcast is to figure out a way for Cynthia to need 2 coats, and for a lot of other people in the room to only need a t-shirt, and for us all to be able to stay in the car together. But it needs to be okay for Cynthia to be cold in public. It needs to be okay to acknowledge that the temperature isn't good for everyone who's in the room. And that, make all of us as comfortable as we can. We've had a couple of really big aha moments as we've had these conversations, and then the much wider conversation that goes on after the episode is recorded, because that's when the women start talking back to us, and that, that's real conversation for us. But one of the big ahas that we've had is that women are so used to being powerless at church that they also feel completely powerless in their own spiritual lives. It had never occurred to us, but once we could see it, it made so much sense, right? I mean, because from how you envision God to how you pray to, whatever else, a man has always defined that for us, always defined it. In a church where women are supervised, we're always under the supervision of men. Find me one situation where women are not under the supervision of men. And I know it's hard to hear, and it's hard to say it out loud, and it was hard. When that sentence occurred to me, I was drafting a chapter of a book for a friend who asked me to write about, one woman's LDS experience. Tell me about what it's like. So I started writing it. And immediately after I started, I was messaging Cynthia saying, this sounds terrible. I can't write these things, But it was things like that. Women are always supervised in the church. I just had never said it out loud. I hadn't thought it. But it's true. It's just a simple truth. That's the way things are set up. That's the way they run. If you don't get used to, you don't think about the things that you're so used to that they don't call your attention anymore. But that was one of them. But in that kind of situation, if you're a lifelong member like I am and like Cynthia is, how are you going to have any spiritual autonomy of your own? It's just not part of your church experience to be in charge. And that includes of yourself or in your own home. I don't know. That's hard to think about. And so that was a big aha for us, that women have given away their spiritual authority. And so one of the things we decided is that we wanted to help women take that back. And I think that we're right in line with what our prophet is asking. You know, President Nelson has been so consistent with the messaging that personal revelation is important and that we're meant to be seeking and getting inspiration for ourselves, and that we're entitled to that, and that he expects us to get it. But I think it's hard for the members to sometimes understand exactly what he means by that. And there's another example of the problem, in my opinion, that if we can't even figure out what it means to go out and get our own, we're waiting for someone to tell us what does that even mean to have a God experience, right? So, I mean, you've got pretty foundational problems here. And so as we have gone along, that's one of the things that's definitely developed in the podcast. And one of the other things that we found, and this has big impact going forward, is that mothers in 2022, many mothers are completely unwilling to pass that powerlessness along to their daughters. They don't want it for their daughters. We hear it again and again and again. And of course, you know, we didn't want it for our daughters either. But how I went around about it was I tried to build a bridge for my daughters, sort of, so I could show them it's okay, you can do this. Here's how I've made it work. You know, it's not great. We don't like this about it. We don't like this about it, but wink, wink, it's okay. Well, they didn't want that bridge. They rejected it. And now we're finding that pretty much no one wants that bridge. But something's got to happen between our generation of young women now and the church that their grandmothers have inhabited. Something has got to give between those two spaces to create a new space that young girls will be willing to step into as a lifelong spiritual home. And that's something we don't really have any answers on, but it's something that collectively as women, we have the wisdom to figure out. This is not beyond us to figure out, even within the current framework that we're living in. Women know what women need.
When I was thinking about, you know, women are powerless, I was thinking about this question, and actually we talked about it with Katie. We had a conversation with her recently on one of their podcasts, Marriage on a Tightrope, and hasn't aired yet. Stay tuned. Next week. But I was really eager to ask her, if you're dealing with mixed faith couples, is it who is leading the church more now? Is it the husband or is it the wife? Like I grew up and I only ever saw, if there was one parent bringing children to church, it was always the mother. I never saw situations where there was a single dad, but you know what I mean? One parent and it was the dad bringing the children to church. And so I asked Katie and she's like, actually, it's pretty mixed. Is that right? Is that what you said? It's kind of 50-50. And yet I was like, I wonder what it was in the 80s when I was a kid. Like, just from my anecdotal experience, I was like, it was always the moms that were taking the kids to church. And now just the stories that we hear, so often it's, I've left, I can't do this anymore. I will not be powerless anymore. My husband takes the kids to church. Now, granted, we're a women's podcast, so we're going to hear maybe more of those stories than, you know, where Katie is hearing them kind of 50-50. But I think that's really something I really tried to notice more now, now that the stories are coming to us, is that, like Susan just said, women are not willing to participate. They were maybe willing, but now that they see, you know, how it's affecting their daughters, they're like, not anymore.
One of the other things that we're seeing as our 2-year conversation with LDS women continues is this sense of restlessness. It's like the women are getting restless. The women are getting restless. And we see it in all kinds of different ways. Even my 86-year-old mother the other day, I was having a conversation with her. Granted, she has dementia, it's getting pretty bad, but still I found this hopeful. We were having a conversation. She had listened to a little snatch of the podcast, and then we got talking about it. And I was telling her about how, you know, we hear from young mothers all the time whose 5-year-old daughter or 7-year-old daughter will say to them, you know, when do I get to pass the sacrament? And the mother says, what do I say to her? You know, as if Cynthia and I have the answers. We don't. We're just happy we don't have 5-year-olds anymore. But this question comes up again and again and again. And my mother thought for a minute and she said, there is absolutely no reason that girls cannot help pass the sacrament. Bam. You could have knocked me over with a feather. My mother is about as traditional and orthodox as it gets. But as the world changes, our thoughts change and evolve with it. We're starting to see things differently. Our lenses are different, right? Our ears are different as a result of the world that we live in. Even the 86-year-olds among us can hear and see the ways that things are different. And so even my mother, most Orthodox of women, can see that there's really maybe no reason that girls couldn't help with passing the sacrament. We're not talking about blessing it. We're not talking about, administering the sacrament, just passing the trays. We all do it in the pews to each other, after all. So I have a friend who sometimes texts me, and I share with Cynthia, just things that he notices. He lives in New York. He's having a different church experience than we're having in the West very often. And he has a high stake calling. And so he always sort of has his ear to the ground. He kind of knows what's going on. And he'll send me messages when he sees things that interest him. And one, it happened to him the other day. He's a temple worker. And they were in the training meeting in the temple for the week. And the temple president was giving a presentation about the prayer circle, about the prayer that's offered in that ordinance. And a woman raised her hand, a temple worker, and said, why can't women give the prayer in the endowment session? And he just kind of shrugged and said, I don't know. But my friend said what was extraordinary to him in that exchange was the anger in the woman's voice. That this woman had feelings about the question that she was asking. And the question was completely dismissed. It didn't mean much, it didn't mean enough to seek an answer or really even express an interest in to the man who was presiding over that meeting. But the woman had feelings about it. And so that's an example of the women getting restless. Women you might not expect, and in ways that you might not see, because we don't show it and talk about it generally.
Something that's been interesting as like I said, this isn't just a Utah problem, despite what I'm from California. I haven't lived there since I was 18, but I still have friends and good family, good friends and family in California. And they, like I say, they say to me, oh, this is a Utah problem. No, it's not. And I don't remember when it was. I wish we had kept the messages, but we received 2 private messages through Instagram, 2 women very close to they were like a week apart. Both of them had been mission presidents' wives. And you notice how I say that, mission presidents' wives. They have no calling, they have no title. And both of them were expressing to us the pain of having been in that position and yet not really having any position. And I thought this was fascinating because here we have someone who's working in a temple. So she's a temple worker. She's not some, I don't know, inactive person. I mean, I'm assuming you have to be fairly active to be a temple worker. And she was restless and you said angry about, why can't women offer the prayer? And then here we had mission presidents' wives writing us saying, I'm sick of this. And I have nothing to say to them other than I'm so sorry. Like, we are hearing this restlessness so much and you're not alone and I'm sorry. And that's really kind of all that we have to offer. Like, I wish we had, maybe something else to say to that. Many of you know the author Glennon Doyle, and she says, the 4 rules for women are be quiet, be small. I had to write them down because I'm going to forget, even though I love her. Be pretty and be selfless. And women who speak up, LDS women who speak up, break 3 of those rules right there, right? We're not small, we're not quiet, and we're not, seen as selfless, right? That's seen as selfish if we speak up because, we hope for more for us. And that restlessness is just so real. We just hear about it so very often. Another area that we've kind of been surprised at as we've done this podcast project is raising daughters in the church and in the world seems harder all the time. And you go ahead and say your part. Thanks about that. Oh, we gotta give you this, not my paper.
We have 5 daughters between us, and none of them are in the church at this point, and it's not looking like they're going to be at any time in the future. None of them have chosen the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as their lifelong spiritual home. And that comes with many feelings for us, as I'm sure if you have navigated this path or know someone who has. That's a challenging thing on all sides, for them, for us. We have a lot of feelings about that, but honestly, why would my daughters want to stay in the one place in their lives that they feel less than? My daughters have successful careers. They don't experience the life that they have at church in the other places that they operate in the world. And I have no compelling testimony, I guess, to offer them as to why they should make that sacrifice and that concession. And that's really hard. I think about often the fact that my grandmothers, I firmly believe, had more autonomy at church than I have. They raised their own money and spent it how they wanted. They gave hands-on blessings and talked about it. I knew about it as a kid. My grandmother was a longtime Relief Society president in a farming community in Utah County. And part of that job was administering to the pregnant women. So my grandmothers had a different church experience than I have. And as a grandmother myself now, I want to believe that my granddaughters could have a different church experience than I have had. But my granddaughters aren't going to be in the church to have that experience. And that pains me deeply. I would like for that to have been different. And I wish that I had started this journey sooner. I don't know that it would have made a difference. I raised pretty nuanced daughters. Sunday dinner was pretty much a debriefing session at our house. What did your teacher say? And let's talk about it. What did you hear in sacrament meeting? And I was raised that way myself, so that was just natural parenting style for me. But it wasn't enough. That wasn't enough. Trying to undo whatever messaging had been given at church that did not feed and nourish them in the ways that they needed as women. That was not enough for them.
We like to start our podcast with our tagline, "It's complicated." And so of our 5 daughters, it's really complicated why each of them have left. It's not one single reason. It's pretty multifaceted. I do have a gay daughter. She saw the writing on the wall. There was no place for her. So, her reasons for leaving were maybe a little bit different than patriarchy. That was part of it, but it was just really complicated. But I have an 18-year-old daughter who's about to graduate from high school. And she said to me, I don't know, my husband's over here somewhere. I don't remember when it was that our youngest said this, that if the church doesn't want my sister, they don't want me. And so she was done as well because her sister was done. And what am I going to say to that? You say, what do you say to your daughter, Susan? I didn't know what to say to my daughter about that. And just recently, say amen. Okay. Got my papers here. But this daughter did say to me recently, I have one son and 2 daughters. And she said, so Mom, this is kind of how it works in the church. There's Nathan, and Nathan is now a BYU graduate and a returned missionary. And then there's me, because I'm a girl. So I'm less than Nathan in the church. And then there's Eileen, because she's gay. She's lower than I am. What am I going to say to that? She's 18. She hasn't been in the church for probably a year or 2. I mean, if I'm honest, she has never been in the church. She's our little girl who was 7, was like, yeah, I'm not doing that baptism thing next year. Like, she just kind of came this way, you know, and yet she sees the writing on the wall about there's her brother who's male, her, and then her gay sister. So it's really, really complicated. It isn't just patriarchy, it's a host of things, but you better believe as a mother, that kind of broke my heart. And when an 18-year-old girl can see it, Houston, we have a problem. Like, she's just a kid. And trust me, she doesn't like to listen to my feminist ways. Like, I'm starting to get her to, you know, get my thoughts into her head. So for her to see that, it really was coming from her. She wasn't just, you know, echoing what I had said, because I had actually never, ever said that to her.
Another thing that we have noticed, and maybe you have noticed this, is that progress often seems like it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back for women in the church, probably in a lot of areas of church, but a couple recently have stood out. A few years ago, things started to feel very hopeful around the concept of Heavenly Mother. You know, we were starting to hear the word Heavenly Parents coming over the pulpit in general conference, and sometimes in local meetings, you know, our leaders were using it. And it showed up in the young women's theme. All of a sudden we had Heavenly Parents, and everyone was celebrating. And so with a small nod like that, and given what we know about our theology, even though we don't talk about that part of it much, but we all know that that's the bottom line understanding, is that there is a Heavenly Mother, right? And so I think women felt empowered to lean into that and start to seek it, right? Women felt a need for it, and they started to want to claim that relationship. And so, of course, as soon as that happens, and we've seen this before, this isn't the first time this cycle has played out, but as soon as that has happened, there's been an effort to, I'm not going to say censor, but I'm going to say discourage our further exploration. And so that's exactly the kind of thing that it feels like. It's progress. I mean, it is. There is progress, but we're never given the full measure of our progress. It seems like we're never willing to really step into the full potential that we lay out for ourselves. This is how it seems to me. I feel like we're, you know, ready to take a step to a larger space together, and then we're too afraid to do it. But in a church of an ongoing restoration, I would hope that eventually the members are going to come to expect an ongoing restoration. We're not the ones who made up that word, that phrase, right? That's not our catchphrase. But we'd like to see it be more than an advertising slogan. And I think that making that known, speaking about the things that we need, that we lack, that we desire spiritually, can help that happen. Another area of this has been the women's session of General Conference. We have a women's meeting, and that's great. It's great and long overdue. And more than half the speakers sometimes, or at least half the speakers, are men. And I can't understand that. I'm genuinely puzzled. That seems like an easy place for me to give visible progress to the women of the church, but we're not quite willing to own it. It's like they want to do it, you know, they almost do it, they're not quite willing to do it. And I think that it may require an increase of conversation among the members to make those things happen. Change is scary. And it's scary in the church. And I'm sure it's scary for the leaders. Man, I would not want to be at the helm of this organization. You know, I would not want to be the one in charge. So I feel a great deal of compassion for the people who are in charge of it. But I feel like the members have a responsibility also. And I don't think that we're fulfilling that responsibility when we show up at church every week and we're not willing to express the things that we need, you know, what we came for, what we desire. And so we're not really doing our job either. And that has become more and more clear to us as our podcast conversations and our conversations with women have continued. Women are pretty darn complicit in their marginalization in this church. That's hard. It was really hard the first time that Cynthia and I acknowledged it and said it out loud. I don't know if we've dared say it out loud on the podcast yet. I don't know if we have. I don't know, but it was scary when it first popped out of our mouths in private conversation, but it's true. It's true. We're part of the problem.
So if you listen to our podcast, you've heard Susan, mainly Susan actually, but I just finished reading the book Mary Magdalene Revealed by Megan Watterson. Wow. I mean, to know that Mary Magdalene was called the apostle to the apostle, or something like that. And then in reading that book, you read about Thecla, who was kind of like this missionary companion sort of to the apostle Paul. I'm like, this is like Elma and Amulek right here. Like these two are like this, they are going out and preaching the word. I mean, and then to read that in the 4th century with the Nicene Creed is when women were erased. Now, I come from a good Mexican Catholic family. Okay, so I have lots of respect for the Catholic Church. That's my roots. My mother is a convert. But lately I've been asking myself, why are we just going by what the Catholics decided for the church and we're kind of implementing that on our own? Because if we restored the church, wouldn't we restored, you know, what Mary Magdalene was doing and what Thecla was doing? Anyway, we could go off into the weeds, and I'm going to save my notes here for a podcast episode because we're running out of time and we want to make sure we can have a little bit of discussion here. But in terms of progress, that's kind of what I've been thinking a lot about lately is the erasure of women and how in the 4th century, but then also how Susan was saying her grandmother had more rights in the church than we do now. So it really does kind of seem to be a little bit of a 2-step forward and 1 step back. Is it 8:30? Yeah. So should we?
Let's talk about this for a second and then
we'll
do some questions.
Okay.
Sound good?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. One thing that has been a most pleasant surprise of this project has been that there are a lot more men interested in women's church experiences than we thought there would be. We didn't really think we'd have any male listeners at all. It turns out we have quite a lot of them, and they actually are interested in joining the conversation. And that is really, really great because there will have to be men engaged in this conversation in order for change to come in the church. That's just the way it is, right? That's the way it is. I'm trying to think there's a quote by Stephen Buhner, and I want to get it right because it's so good. I know it's in here.
Page 5.
Oh yeah, Stephen Buhner, he wrote, "You cannot use the tools of a system to refine the system whose tools you are using." We need new tools. I'll repeat it. You cannot use the tools of a system to refine the system whose tools you are using. And we have been trying to use our existing tools for a long, long time. So I think maybe it's time to invent some new tools, but we're capable of doing that. We're capable of doing that. It's an ongoing restoration, and we're here now, and we all can participate in that happening.
I don't know. Some people think that we have our podcast to affect change at the top. But like we said, we're in the cheap seats, like that is not our goal at all. I mean, we hope that we can affect change in women, and so in our personal lives. And so hopefully that's what we see happening. And I'll tell you one experience that I had recently with a loved one of mine. She texted me and she said, if I'm honest with my struggles, she was saying that she wants to renew her temple recommend, but she's not sure if she can pass the interview right now. She said, if I'm honest with my struggles, it's not going to be renewed. I kind of talk about it with my husband, but also I think he gets worried about me when I bring it up. I don't really know who else to talk to about these issues. I am worthy, but I'm struggling with some things. For example, I think I believe and want to believe in Joseph Smith, but I can't say that I know. I have some questions about some things. And my reply to her was, I guess I would ask myself, why do you feel the need to share anything with your bishop at all? Is your bishop a therapist? Is he trained in pastoral care? Has he exhibited to you that he can be a pastor? Are you looking for pastoral care, or are you just looking to renew your temple recommend? Are you looking for someone else to tell you that you're worthy? So she kind of started out wanting to talk about, the issue is the temple recommend, and I'm saying, no, the issue is, why do you feel the need to have the approval of your clergymen? I think maybe that is what we need to talk about here. And so I tell you that story because people ask us, are you running out of things to say? And it's like, no, because in that instance, we were speaking about one thing, the temple recommend, and then really it just snowballed. I'm like, no, the real question is, why do you need him? Why do you need his approval? And so the longer we do this project, the more these topics just keep snowballing. And in this particular instance, that really is what that's really our goal in this project, is for women to take their own spiritual authority back. I understand external authority in the church, and I understand how that works, and I respect that. Of course, I hope for change, but I respect that that's the system now. But if there's one place that we can start to affect change, let it be within ourselves. And so that's what's really been the goal of our project here. Do you have anything to say? So we wanted to spend some time maybe asking a few questions and getting some replies from some of you. And so one of the questions is, what do you know? What do you know? No, we're not going to do that.
No,
one
but there
right
would
now.
be good answers.
There would be.
There
There would be really good answers if we asked you all, what do you know? Well, should we start with the question that we put out on the podcast, or excuse me, on the Faith Again website, which is, what might change if Latter-day Saint women began to speak openly and honestly about their feelings and experiences? What do you think?
So if you decide to respond, I need you to probably stand up and talk really loud. Okay.
Or you could be like
Or you
Donahue.
can come up and you see.
My voice carries. Don't
Yay!
worry. We're fine. I think that we would find a better space. The more I individually talk to not only sisters, but brethren, there's more of a space. But like you guys said even earlier, we don't talk to each other about that. We talk about it in the parking lot, we talk about it on the bunko night, but we don't talk about it at church. And I think we would find that there is a space for each of us, and that we are all looking for that space. But like you said, where we all have a different path in that space to like grow. Like there's exponential growth, and that's what God wants of us, is exponential growth. Why are we hindering anybody else's, and why do we not share that growth with others? I had a brother tell me that I share too much. He was my prior bishop, and I almost lost it. And my husband like is squeezing my hand and I was just like, but that shouldn't be a thing. That should never be said to someone. That should never be said to someone, let alone someone who is an ecclesiastical leader, to someone who is trying to help other sisters. So I think if you share and be okay with what you're sharing too, and feel safe in that sharing.
Thank you.
There's a comment on Zoom.
Oh, okay.
Okay, someone on the Zoom chat says, we're not asking to be in charge of everything. We just want an equal footing. We just want to be in rooms where decisions are made. Men would still get leadership callings too. It would be beautiful to see men and women working together in leadership to bless the lives of wards and stakes and the whole church.
Amen. Thank you to whoever said that. Anybody else have anything to say? Yeah.
I'd advance that vocabulary and tone is the only thing that will work to persuade top leaders to make any change. Carolyn Pearson perhaps is the master of this, but I can name a dozen more. That some of the things that she advances are progressive, but because her tone is just right to the patriarchy to hear, and they know that her intentions are sincere, she makes more traction, gets more traction than perhaps some others. So you get a lot more mileage with good tone, good word choice, good presentation. It's kind of sad, it has to bear on that, I'm
Right.
sorry,
It's realistic.
but that's the only way that we'll make any traction. One second point, if I might, vocabulary is awkward, and we've been using terms like she this, he that, men this, women that. Please know that a lot of men are not leaders in the church either.
Mhm.
Okay. So we're only talking about a subset there. Now, someone might defend it by saying, yeah, but those men that aren't leaders could be next week, next month, next year. I understand that, but they're not now. And in many cases, I know lots of men in their 50s, 60s, who have never really been a leader, above a classroom president. So just food for thought.
Thank you.
I would say, I agree with that, the conversations I've had with my husband is the same type of thing of like, as frustrating as it is for women, and it's frustrating. But to look at the majority of men in the church, it's file and rank minions as well, and that's the reality of it. And yes, it's still like, the brother, the sister, there is a hierarchy for certain. And if push came to shove in a room, you're less than. It would definitely defer to that. But I appreciate that comment, because I see that too. It's just like, I don't know that that's an effective of a change that needs to happen, because you can't all be.
Yeah.
So Brian, back ahead too.
We have a lot of people who say to us, do you guys know of a men's version of your podcast? Like for men who feel disenfranchised? And I was like, you can start it,
I'm going to disagree with that, just because I don't know, I'm uncomfortable with the idea that just by shifting tone somehow that makes it better. It may be more effective, but I'm uncomfortable with that simply for one reason, and that is, and maybe others, that I think about later.
Speak loudly, Brian.
So what makes me uncomfortable about that is that too often tone is synonym for woman, right? So it bothers me when we say, well, if we could just say it right, if we could say it softly, if we could say it deferentially, whatever. It's bothersome, because I really do believe that those are often words and concepts that are really used just to kind of, say, well, somebody's screechy, or they're, ambitious or whatever. It sort of minimizes what's actually taking place. It minimizes the actual feeling. And so I get that maybe we can argue that it's more effective, but it shouldn't be. Because it's too easy to conflate that with gender roles and those kinds of things.
Yeah, thank you.
There's a comment here.
Could I just interject on Brian's point? I agree with him for the reason that any of us who know Carolyn know that she is diplomatic in so many ways, but she also knows that she's gotten really nothing done. Name anything she's done. The brethren who are in her state respect her and appreciate her, and she is articulate and persuasive, but they just go on with business.
Interesting.
without being bothered.
Another comment on Zoom speaks to this, says, as with minorities, if you protest too much, people will think you are uppity. Yet if you don't make a scene, you will be ignored. Tone is also the excuse that the Bountiful Children's Foundation hears back about why the church has taken so long to respond to our malnourished infants and nursing mothers. Using tone as an excuse is unacceptable, but unfortunately, it is a real issue.
Yeah.
Here for some more women here. Yes, Sonia.
As I recently, I've begun a study into the history of Mormon feminism. And it seems to be that whenever this conversation is not anywhere close to new. It has been happening for decades. And
Amen.
decades, and it seems like whenever a group of women rise up and use their voices, whether, no matter what the tone, the brethren seem to squash it. There's a purging and a silencing, and I think we're seeing that more and more. And so it feels so discouraging to me. Like, is it worth it to put my effort here? Or is my effort better used outside the church, which currently I'm doing in other areas where, do you know what I mean? It's just so difficult to continually put your effort into a place where it doesn't feel like you're making any traction. I'm a former young women's president, and during my time that I served 14 young women. 8 of them have left the church, and 3 are on their way out. And there's one young girl, she's 17, and she sends me video after video of her crying into her pillow at night. She's like 17 years old, and the thought of like waiting, like everyone says, just wait, change is coming, change is coming. She goes, the thought of that is just daunting. I don't have time for that. And so it just is discouraging for me. So I'm just being honest. I know that's not very helpful, but to me, it feels like a lost cause.
Thank you.
Susan, you hopefully I can talk. I don't know. You brought up an interesting point. You made the comment that women are not, correct me because I'm not getting the right words here, but that they're not taking their place, they're not reaching their potential. I'm not getting, what was it you said?
I did say that we were complicit in our own marginalization.
There you go. So my question is, what is it that you suggest if you feel like, and I know you're not being condemning in any way, but because I agree with what you're saying, but do you have suggestions? Like, because I know the last time I tried to speak up in a kind and loving way, turned out to be in a supposedly safe state meeting. Camille, it was terrible.
It was, we were there.
I'm so sorry.
Unfortunately, this event tonight has brought up a lot of emotional pain from that meeting. Why would you choose to do that again? I mean, I might, because I'm stubborn, but when you say we're complicit, but when we try in a kind of loving way, and do you have suggestions?
I think you always feel like you're in trouble. Yeah. And I think I always feel like I'm in trouble if I do something, I show myself, I'll be in trouble. Because you can be.
It's real.
It's real. And when I say that we're complicit, I want to tell you a little bit about what my thinking is behind that statement, because I deeply understand why I feel like we're complicit. And it is a really big ask to ask women to address the problems, admit the problems, acknowledge the problems in the foundation of a thing that they have given their lives to. They've made choices to forego things that they might have wanted to do in their own lives. You know, a lot of them have married very young. They've had children that may or may not have been their first choice, you know, of things to do. A lot of women give a lot to follow the sort of prescribed path
of a faithful Latter-day Saint woman. It requires a lot. It does of men too, and I'm not minimizing that. We're just talking about women tonight, and that's what's within my experience, so I can talk about it. A lot of women give up a lot. And so when you have a 50 or almost 60-year-old woman like myself, to ask her to go back and reevaluate some of those choices, look at them in a different light, and through a different lens, that is hard. It's a big ask. And it touches every part of our lives, right? It's tied into our family relationships with our parents. It's tied into the spouse that we married in the temple, assuming that that was going to be forever. You know, it's tied into the children who we've messaged for our whole lives with this gospel that we want them to also base their lives around. It's tied into everything in our lives. And so I fully understand why women are happy with the status quo. Why women will go to their death defending the fact that they feel seen, or they feel heard, or they feel like they're equal to their husband, or they feel like they have as much, you know, priesthood power as their husband, or all the things that women say. I understand where that comes from. But what I see right now, I feel like the church is a toddler standing in front of a speeding train, and I'm watching the train come, because our young women do not want this. The sales job has not worked. That's over for them. They're living in a different world from the world I lived in. I don't even know who's first.
I'll just make a comment too. These comments kind of brought up stuff for me too. I think some of my frustration is like, and I'm kind of taking a step back from church right now, because I felt like I've tried and tried for years and years to just do little things, and they get shut down at every turn. And I'm probably too vocal to ever get called to a leadership position or teaching youth. I don't know how you guys do it, but I've been active like for 30 plus years, and it's never happened for me. And so I'm just trying to work in the spheres that I'm called to. And I was like on the activities committee, and I felt like I wanted to do like a fireside series on anti-racism, how to include our LGBTQ brothers and sisters in the church, and something with empowering women. And they would always just tell me, well, I think we need bishopric permission and stuff, and it just would never go anywhere.
Right.
And I wanted to do like a community event where we'd like just invite the broader community and do like an outdoor art show before Easter with some stuff from Scott Painter. And they were just like another thing, like, oh, let's see if we need permission. I'm like, why?
Yeah.
Why do we need permission?
It's our default.
And I just like couldn't do it anymore, asked to be released. And then like that weekend, like the Brad Wilcox stuff came out, and I'm like, I have given my whole life to this church, and they are mocking me, and we're to a place where we can maybe sort of apologize for racism stuff, but we're nowhere near apologizing for how we treat women.
Yeah. Can I say something to your comment, and then about the complicit thing is, Susan and I have very different personalities. I am the type of person that will make appointments with my stake president or bishop, and I will go in there and I will lay it on the line. I've also known them 25 years. So, you know, I have some social capital with them, and you've heard Susan before on the podcast. She's more of a back channels kind of gal, as she likes to put it. And so when we say complicit, I hope no one thinks that we mean that you have to be someone like me who makes the appointments and goes in and says all the things. If that's your strength and you feel like you can do that, I think that's fantastic, because I think we do need to at last say it. But I also think that setting boundaries, you know, I have set boundaries, like I will not participate in this, and this anymore. So to me, that's not being complicit. And I've had those experiences where I met with a bishop about some family issues and he made things worse. Bless his heart. He's a victim of patriarchy as well too. Like, and so I feel for him, even though he made things worse, he was trying his best. And yet because of that, I set a boundary, like I will never do that again unless he is a therapist or he's trained in pastoral care. Like I'm not going to put myself in that position. So for me, that's also what it means about not being complicit, is quit putting myself in positions where I keep getting punched. And that's just me. And I think each person has to decide for herself what her own boundaries are going to be, so that we aren't complicit in our own marginalization. Because part of it really is just choosing not to participate in certain things anymore, even though like I am an active member and I teach Sunday school, and you know, how long that lasts, I don't know, but I'll take it while they let me do that.
And for me, in the way of advice, I guess, I don't even like to call it that. We don't give advice.
We don't.
We're not answer people. We don't think of ourselves that way. But I was thinking, the brother who shared something about Carolyn Pearson never having accomplished anything, and I'll bet she does feel that way a lot. But what I would say to that is, actually, she has ministered to thousands and thousands and thousands of people. She has touched people's lives. She has changed hearts. She has been the kind of transformation that I believe the church is meant to be. And so for me, part of deciding I'm not going to be complicit in this anymore was deciding that I'm going to start showing up whole myself. I'm going to start showing up whole. I'm going to talk about the messy stuff, right? I'm going to dump my puzzle pieces out on the table when I walk in to Relief Society and say, could you help me put this together? Because it does not look anything like what y'all are talking about. It change nothing for anybody except me, right? I'm going to be changed. My experience at church is going to be changed by that. And there is always going to be someone else in that room whose experience is also changed. I guarantee you that if you will show up whole, there will be someone else in that room who has been waiting for something to grab onto that has been missing until you showed up with it. Yeah.
Sorry. So along those lines, I grew up in a home where I was constantly shut down. You may remember your Color of Nuance episode. That was my mother that you quoted, her Facebook comment that was very black and white. That's me. That's my mom. She is the Sunday school police, the Relief Society police. She is the one that will police every single comment, and that's the home I grew up in. And so it wasn't until a couple of years ago that I actually had the guts to try and figure this out on my own. And so I know what it's like to be in an environment where you're constantly just, your wings are clipped every time you open your mouth. And so I think it's really important for all of us, as long as we can possibly stay, to stay and give support to the women who are brave enough to open their mouth. And if there's a policeman in the room, to support the person who is getting attacked. And that's why I'm trying my hardest to stay, because if there's one person in there who gets shut down by somebody like my mother, I want to be able to lend my voice as support and open the space wider for them, because I know what it's like to feel your wings clipped, and I hate it. And I think we need to just support each other as long as we can.
Thank you.
I want to share this comment from the Zoom. It feels like if the leaders of the church really listen to voices of the members and actually make changes because of that, that somehow they are spiritually weak, being swayed by the voices of the world, in quotation marks, if it didn't come straight from God first. It feels we are so powerless to affect change. Are we not all the body of Christ and working as Christ's hands?
Jenny, you have your hand up.
Oh, yeah, sure. It's been really beautiful. Thank you. So I'm serving right now as a Relief Society president. I've been in 1 year. And, you know, what I thought when I stepped into this was, you know, you manage people's needs, physical needs, you manage emotional needs. But what I didn't realize in this year is that in this space, you step into an arena where it makes me think of Roosevelt's quote. The critic. So in this arena, if I am to adjust the status quo, I've learned now in this year, you take darts, you take them. And I've had to take space to reclaim my energy and take space to heal. But along with those darts come, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. There are people that are hurting that need the status quo, even if it's changed by an inch at a time. I pay, and I'm not putting this all on myself like I'm some great leader, but I'm willing to pay if it helps someone. And I think the healthiest place to serve in a leadership calling, if we're really going to do it honestly, is at the edge of the inside. Because I can see it's, I'm one step away from out. I can also turn and face in and see both with honesty. And I think being an affectionate critic lends itself to caring, care. I care so much that I'm going to be critical of what could be better. And, you know, it's amazing to have a space like this to just show up whole, but do it. Take the darts and find those who you can fall on when you're recovering, reclaiming, because there are people who will need it.
I'm not gonna stand up, because I'm really loud. So I have recently really started trying to harness the power of social media. Elder Bednar is one of my absolute favorite human beings on this planet, and he's talked a lot about social media and you know, technology and how there's a lot of negative aspects to it, but there's also a lot of good that can come from it. And a lot of times it's talked about in sharing the gospel, but I feel like we need to also take time and space to share these opinions and thoughts and feelings that we're having. And sometimes that can be really scary, just like it is in person. But I feel like, you know, I only know about your podcast because some friend of mine had shared about an episode on their social media. And it was a quote that had just really resonated with me. And so because of that, I started looking back, and I'm kind of going through and listening to all of the episodes now. I'm like halfway through season 2. I think, you know, a lot of times we think if we're not going to be complicit, then the only spaces we can work within are within church spaces. And if that's really hard, then I think we can take the opportunity to just share on social media and with friends and family, and maybe something we say will resonate with somebody that we know that can take those things on, that are maybe stronger in those areas, like the sister that just shared. And so I really like that idea that we can work within spaces that we feel comfortable within to work in that way, because we never know what we share, who it's going to affect and who it's going to resonate with and who it's going to send on a path that can affect a change in a different arena than what we're working within. And so I think sometimes we just have to think outside of the box a little bit.
Of course.
And really utilize, you know, the tools that are available to us.
Thank you.
Oh, I was just gonna say that the leaders that we have right now, they're not always going to be around. And the younger generation is rising up, but look at how we're mentioning how many youth we've lost. 2 of my 3 kids are active, one's patchy with activity. I'm patchy. I mean, it's kind of happening. The more people that I talk with, I'm surprised how many friends have left the church, family members. And I just think, okay, where is the church headed? If the rising generation, the youth that are coming up just are so disinterested and disenchanted with it, with the way the structure is now, I think, what is this gonna look like in 20 years, you know?
Great question. I don't know.
Yeah. So I had this interesting experience. So there's my daughter's friend who found his mission, who came out as gay, and he didn't talk to, he talked to the mission president, who was really good with the situation. And he then said, better tell my mom. And so he called her. And once he accepted himself, like fully, and he talked to his mom, he said, with Amy, the love that I felt was exponential. He goes, I finally loved myself, and then I was able to love everybody even more. And that's carried through, like, he is incredible. And why I say that is because I think sometimes we do not love our own selves and our own voices and who we are and what we are. And frankly, I don't think, I'm guilty of this too, you can ask the question, like, how that make me feel? How did I feel? I just turned even that question off of who I was as a person, because it was about everybody else and never about me. And the mantra, love thy neighbor as thyself, it was always love thy, the neighbor, but like, do we really love ourselves? And I think one of the key things is if people really can ask the question, because of it, you feel, do I love myself? And you accept yourself. Then I think you turn around and you accept everybody else, their differences. But I think there's so much of trying to just pattern after somebody else and do it right, in the right way, that makes it like not a sweet experience. And so I think we do want to blend those things together of everybody has something special, and let's like celebrate that and embrace that. But I think it actually turns to internally, like if you really love yourself, your love for mankind will be exponential, and you will accept their differences. So I find that in the church, ironically, we know that message, but it doesn't, it's like not working.
Yeah, thank you.
So maybe one more comment, and then you guys can wrap up.
Yeah, so I really appreciate this. My wife has been sharing your podcast with me, and hearing everybody's experiences is really educational, and I appreciate that. I appreciate gaining perspective, and I love hearing everybody's experiences, and they're all valid, they're real, right? I love what you're saying about every one of us has our own individual experience, and that's real for each of us. And the one thing I've enjoyed the most is hearing and hear so we all go through hard things, that we can be there for each other and to support each other going through these hard things. Men and women, youth and adults. We could be there to support each other. That to me is what Jesus Christ taught. To love one another, to minister to one another, the one by one, right? The apostles talk about one by one. We're not here to build a church of millions of people. That's not the first. We're here one for the one. To help each individual,
Right.
Whether that's in the church or out of the church. Everybody has their unique experience, and there's problems with the church, right? There's organizational problems. There's no doubt about that. There's good and bad people in the church. There's no doubt about that. But it's really comforting, and to me to still hear that we're here for the one, to love one another and to help bring each other to Christ, because that's what it's all about. It's not about how many, the church organization. It's about our Savior. And so I really appreciate that, and the real emotion, the real experience. And I hope in my life I'll do this, and I hope it will be real, like we've been talking about here. That's probably the thing that's impacted me the most, to be real, to be authentic, to go to church broken.
Yeah.
And to say I'm broken. That's why we go. The church isn't for the whole and the perfect. It's for all of us that are broken. And I love that. And I appreciate you sharing that and sharing everybody's stories. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I loved your description. As you're talking, I was thinking, well, that sounds like church to me. That sounds like a description of church. And the thing that I loved about kind of that moment of realization is that we have the tools to build that. We have the tools to make that change, right? We can do that right now. We can do it one room at a time and one conversation at a time. And so that, to me, that's the most hopeful thing, most hopeful message that I can possibly imagine. thank you so much for coming out tonight. And thank you for, if you're a listener, and if you're not a listener, we hope you'll become one. And if you want to be a guest, please let us know. And Cynthia and I, we're not trying to convince anybody of anything. We are really just interested in documenting the journey, telling the truth as it's happening to all of us, not just our truth, but our collective truth, because it needs to be told. Love is made of those stories. It's found in those stories. And so anyway, thank you very much.
Well, that was a great way to end it. I don't think I have anything else to say to that, except that a lot of people ask us, why do you stay? Why do you stay? And I'm like, that's what our podcast is about. Like, go listen to that. But I get what they're saying is like, how on earth are you making this work? And again, I hope that's what we're talking about. But this is the church of my youth. This is where I found God. And to me, I'm willing to fight for that. And I get that I'm wired a certain way, that I can keep maybe taking some of those punches or keep showing up. And sometimes we take breaks, and we've talked about maybe mini sabbaticals or whatever. But this church has meant everything to me, and it's difficult. And okay, I'll use both and, Jana, right? Not either or, but this church has meant everything to me. And I can see that it's hurting people, and I want things to be better, and I want to be part of that change, even in the cheap seats. I want to, even if it only changes me and Susan and a handful of people, to me, that's beautiful, because this is my spiritual home. And as I say on the podcast, it's my church, and I'm not going anywhere. So I'll close with that.
Well done, you two. Thank you so much. And to all of you for being willing to share your hearts, sometimes your painful stories. And I know there's a lot more that could have been shared if we had the time, and I wish we did. Because again, this space for 9 years now has been a place where people can share those painful stories. So you're always welcome to come back to the next one and the next one each month. And I hope you imbibe in their lovely podcast, because it is powerful. It is powerful. You know, I love the diversity that's here. So I don't know if Chelsea Homer's here. Chelsea. So she's got her own little following on Facebook of pretty much just women, right? And you know, Chelsea is no longer in the church, but she's trying to create a space for those where it hasn't worked for them anymore. And Sonia is doing her work, who spoke back there. And if you follow her on Instagram, she's got some really powerful and lovely thoughts that can be strengthening. You know, Catherine works on the inside edge and just writes beautiful poetry about the divine feminine and the way she sees it through nature. That's powerful. Jenny's doing it as a Relief Society president. You know, I've heard so many stories of how you're doing it. And we've got Tim and Aubrey Chavez who do the podcast Faith Matters, sorry. And they're in the back, and they do a lot of really good interviews. One that comes to mind that makes me feel like we've taken a step forward in the church. You know, I'm still stuck in the first volume of Saints 1 because I keep reading so many other things. But one of the things I do really appreciate about that is women's stories are like constantly in there, constantly. And they just did an interview with one of the editors for the volume 4, which I don't think is out yet, right? It's not quite yet. Volume 3, okay, sorry. So it does cover, I think, the period where the church transitioned from women having blessings, doing blessings and all that stuff, to how we got to kind of where we are here. So that will be interesting to read. So what I love is that I see so many different people in different spaces trying to do this work, whether they're in the church still or out of the church. I trust that God is trying to guide us, and there's service to be done in every realm. And so there's no judgment here on my part, and hopefully not on each other's part. That we can just love each other where we are. I think that's super critical for us to make the progress forward and wherever God leads us. I mean, if that's our question, right, each morning, God, help me be your hands and heart. You won't go wrong. I found that in my own life. So I encourage us to do that and to allow, to listen and allow other people, especially those who have heard and had trauma, to speak, because their stories need to be heard. And I think that's what you guys are doing really well. And that's super powerful. Just one other thought that came to mind. I recently listened to The Sword and Shield, and it talks about the symbiotic relationship that Malcolm X and Martin Luther King had. And together, the one that was more sharp, known as Sharp, Malcolm X, really lent a lot of credibility in the end to Martin Luther King's more peaceful approach. So I think you sometimes need both. I mean, sometimes, again, we can be very judgmental. I remember growing up being very judgmental of Sonny Johnson, and I don't know her well, but sometimes those voices matter too. And maybe that's what they're called to do. So we need to have space and room for, I think, everyone. Thanks again for everything. So we close with a hymn, and I could not get these two to give me a song because they were busy eating their cheeseburgers at Hyers. So they said, you choose. And I said, I'm a guy. You guys should be choosing. So what I've chosen is Be Still My Soul, and they've said that's okay. So that's 124. If you have the gospel app, you can also do it in Google. We only have the lyrics because the church doesn't have the right to the actual music, but the words are powerful. I have asked the dear friend Marie de St. Aubin to give the closing prayer, and it strikes me that I didn't ask anybody to kind of lead the music because I can't do that. Maureen, would you mind also just starting this out? And you've got a wonderful voice that could do that. I would prefer a cappella if that's okay. There's something really, and we've done it before, special about just hearing a human voice sing thoughtfully, meaningfully. So it's 124, Be Still My Soul. And you have to choose lyrics on it, because the first thing that might come up is the whole song with the music. You want to come up here, Elaine? Want to do it there?
Because I have one bar.
Want to use that?
Oh, no. We doing one verse?
We can do, how many should we do? There's only three, they're short. Let's do all three, they're beautiful. Written by a woman. Sorry.
Be still my soul, the Lord is on my side. With patience bear thy cross of grief or pain. Lead to thy throne to order and provide. In every change, He
gathering tonight, and we're deeply grateful for all that has been shared, both silently and aloud. Pray mostly for our hearts to be stilled, and that in our restlessness and in all the mystery we can find peace along the way. Help us to support and comfort one another, to lay aside our judgments and to rely on Christ and his atoning gift. We're very grateful for our beautiful lives and blessings, and pray humbly for thy Spirit to be with us in the name of our Savior Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you, everyone. Just one quick note. I don't know how many have seen Bright Spark, the documentary about the artist Trevor Salvi, the LDS artist Trevor Salvi. Super good. It's streaming now, so I highly recommend that. It's a really beautiful, compassionate story of this wonderful man, and actually the artist colony. Many of you might have heard of some of these artists. So there's that, and then you can always go to ThinkAgain-FaithAgain, ThinkAgain-FaithAgain.live to see who's coming up for the next few months. You're always welcome. You're always welcome to invite anybody you would like. And you can get on my email list through that website too, or just reach out to me. All right, love you all. Thanks.
That was lovely.
Thank you for being the techie dude.
No, I got a little